Welcome back. We start our news bulletin from the US, where the death count from the new coronavirus has risen by 3,856 as President Donald Trump remains firm to lift lockdown restrictions. The country's fertility toll has surged to over 37,000, with infection cases over 700,000. Globally, the number of infections has now crossed 2.2 million, with over 154,000 fatalities. More in this report.
The pandemic has paralyzed the U.S. economy, shuttering businesses and leaving 22 million Americans seeking unemployment benefits. Public health experts say the businesses can only safely restart with a comprehensive testing program. President Donald Trump says individual states, not the federal government, are responsible for developing testing capabilities. Moreover, Trump is eager to reopen the country soon and dismisses the response to his plan as political posturing.
Some point in the not too distant future, we're going to have our country back. And it's going to be, I think, really with what we're doing on stimulus and helping people keep their businesses together and their lives together and their jobs, it's going to be better than ever before. I hope so. I really do.
Elsewhere, Georgia has banned the movement of all private vehicles until April 21st to strict a state of emergency. The British government has also stepped up efforts to contain the virus after criticism it was too slow to react on several fronts. Meanwhile, Sweden has warned of the tougher circumstances.
It is a myth that life goes on as normal in Sweden. Many people stay at home and have stopped traveling. Many businesses are collapsing. Unemployment is expected to rise dramatically. There are a wide range of new regulation and recommendation that affects the whole society, also the private lives of people.
Germany says the outbreak in the country has become manageable again, as the number of recoveries has been higher than the new infections this week.
In Pakistan, the number of coronavirus cases have jumped past 74,000, with nearly 500 infections reported in the last 24 hours. The health officials said 8 more people died since yesterday, bringing the death toll to 143. Officials said more than 1,800 patients have recovered from the disease so far. The medics said the ratio of locally transmitted cases has increased to 62%. They said the total number of active cases in the country is over 5,500. Moreover, the government has extended the suspension of domestic and international flights up to the 30th of April. Meanwhile, 195 Pakistanis along with 101 trucks have returned as Islamabad reopened the Torkham border for its stranded citizens in Afghanistan. The government said almost all those who returned were transporters stranded on the Afghan side of the border. Moving on to Russia, where authorities have warned citizens that the Russian capital will face peak of the coronavirus outbreak within 2 to 3 weeks. City's Mayor Sergei Sobyanin also opened a new hospital complex for patients with infectious diseases. Russia has reported a record rise of 4,069 coronavirus cases over the last 24 hours, bringing its nationwide tally to over 32,000. Moscow is under strict lockdown, with its 12.7 million residents only allowed to leave home for buying food or to get urgent medical treatment. Deputy Mayor Anastasia Rakova said all residents must follow the restrictions to protect themselves from the disease.
We will reach the peak of the coronavirus outbreak within the following 2 or 3 weeks, most probably. Today, you are on the front line. You are taking on the main burden of the fight against the coronavirus. Today, it depends on us how Moscow will get through the pandemic. It depends on everyone, on you doctors, on Moscow residents following the self-isolation rules, on us officials taking timely and appropriate decisions.
Now, in another news, Russia says it holds the U.S. responsible for Afghanistan's political uncertainty by favoring President Ashraf Ghani after the elections. At a media briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova also called on China and Pakistan to coordinate their efforts to resolve the Afghan crisis. She said the intra-Afghan talks are unlikely to begin until the power crisis in Kabul is resolved. The spokesperson also criticized the U.S. for using questionable approaches while designating certain entities as terrorists. She added, Washington mostly relies on media manipulation instead of listening to the experts in this manner. The US's arms control talks must focus on Washington's proposal for a new accord that includes Russia and China. In a telephone call with his Russian counterpart, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said talks must be based on President Trump's vision for a trilateral agreement. State Department spokesperson said Pompeo and Sergei Lavrov discussed steps in the strategic security dialogue. He also discussed bilateral issues with Lavrov, including the detention of US citizens. Last year, Trump proposed the US, Russia, and China negotiate a new pact to replace the 2010 New START Accord. But China, whose arsenal of an estimated 300 nuclear weapons is far smaller than those of Russia and the US, rejected such talks. The arms reduction treaty between the US and Russia will expire next February. The Amnesty International says India's internet ban in occupied Kashmir is against the rights of its people. The valley has been reeling under New Delhi's curfew and communications blackout restrictions for the last 258 days. In a statement, the international watchdog said restrictions on access to information through the internet cannot be justified on grounds of security. It called on the Indian government to lift the ban on high-speed internet across the occupied territory. The statement says extending restrictions is adding to the problems instead of solving any. It said UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has also expressed concern over the lack of education of children under lockdown. Earlier, Guterres said children with slow and expensive internet services are severely disadvantaged. Meanwhile, in India, over 1,200 migrant workers have started a hunger strike, demanding to be sent back to their homes. Millions of migrants are stuck in different states after the government imposed a sudden curfew due to COVID-19 in the country. Talking to media, the workers said they have completed their 14-day quarantine and they should be allowed to go home. The migrants said they have not eaten anything for the last 3 days as a strike and they do not want to stay in shelters. Meanwhile, the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party's lawmaker Shahindra Singh Chauhan asked people to stay away from Muslims. He said people from certain community are responsible for the spread of virus and everyone should keep a distance of safety. India has recorded over 14,000 countrywide coronavirus infections with 488 deaths. The Kurdish-led administration of the northeastern Syria says it has recorded first death from the new coronavirus. In a statement, it said that a 53-year-old man had died at a hospital in Qamishli on 2nd April. It added, a sample sent to Damascus for testing was later confirmed as positive. President Bashar al-Assad's regime has closed borders, forbidden movement between provinces, and shut schools and restaurants. So far, Syria has recorded 2 deaths from COVID-19 and 38 infection cases. Only 100 patients are being tested in a day, with half of the tests being carried out in Damascus. Aid groups have warned of the potentially devastating consequences of a severe outbreak in the country. A Palestinian association says at least 13 journalists are currently being held in Israeli prisons. In a statement, the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate said 2 female journalists are among the detainees. It stressed Tel Aviv's aim is to prevent journalists from doing their work and covering Israeli soldiers' crimes against Palestinian people. The statement was released on the occasion of Palestinian Prisoners' Day. Over 1 million Palestinians have been held in Israeli jails since 1967, when it occupied West Bank, Gaza. The syndicate is continuing its efforts in international courts to expose Israeli occupation to the world. Turkey says it has killed 3 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party during a counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said military operations backed by air power were carried out in the Avashin-Bazian region. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. Welcome back. Iran has held a parade with disinfection vehicles, mobile hospitals, and other medical equipment to mark its Army Day amid COVID-19 crisis. The Defender of the Homeland Helpers of Health parade was held to underscore the military's role during the pandemic. The annual Iranian military parade features spectacles of missiles, submarines with warplanes flying overhead. But this year, the traditional parade was replaced by health equipment in solidarity with the medical workers. In a message, President Hassan Rouhani said, "Enemy now is hidden and doctors and nurses are at the front lines of the battlefield." In Libya, the UN-recognized government says its troops conducted an airstrike against Khalifa Haftar's Eastern Army at Al-Watia Air Base. A military spokesman says the airstrike was part of its Operation Volcano Ridge. This comes after the Eastern Army carried out attacks on civilian settlements in Tripoli, killing 5 and wounding 18 people. The health ministry said a teenager and an elderly were among those killed in the raid. Officials said the shelling has not stopped for hours despite appeals for a ceasefire over COVID-19 crisis. They said the humanitarian situation in the war-torn country is catastrophic and terrifying. In Chad, 5 people have been killed after a shell accidentally dropped and exploded on a house in the capital of N'Djamena. In a statement, the military said the incident occurred during the landing of an aircraft on a military airport. The statement said a commander and 4 family members died due to the explosion. The explosion also left several people wounded and some houses destroyed. The military said an investigation is underway to know the reasons behind the incident. The UN Economic Commission for Africa has warned the COVID-19 could kill 300,000 Africans and push 29 million into extreme poverty. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the continent needs over $200 billion to contain the virus and curb its economic impact. In a report, the UNECA said at least a $100 billion fund is needed to immediately resource health response. The UN agency also basked a call for an additional $100 billion stimulus, which would include a halt to all external debt service. Africa's 54 countries have reported fewer than 20,000 infection cases so far. But the WHO says the continent could see as many as 10 million cases in 3 to 6 months. Without the additional funds requested by the UN, the Economic Commission for Africa estimates as many as 1.2 billion Africans could be infected.
In the past week, there has been a 51% increase in the number of reported cases in my own continent, Africa, and a 60% increase in the number of reported deaths. With the current challenge of obtaining testing kits, it's likely that the real numbers are higher than reported.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said the pandemic is a setback in the region for the progress made to eradicate poverty and underdevelopment. Now moving on, the UN says once created, the vaccine against COVID-19 should be available and affordable for everyone. In a tweet, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the global coalition is required to develop the vaccine, which must be considered a public good. Meanwhile, the UK has launched a task force to support efforts to make a vaccine as quickly as possible. The government said 21 new research projects will get funding from a $17 million investment pool.
We need to apply the best of British scientific endeavour to the search for the coronavirus vaccine. To that end, I can announce today that the government has set up a vaccines task force to coordinate the efforts of government, academia and industry towards a single goal: to accelerate the development of a coronavirus vaccine.
1 million doses of a potential COVID-19 vaccine developed by British scientists at Oxford University are already being manufactured. Now, let's look at the Human Rights Watch, which has asked Malaysia to allow Rohingya refugees in the country and to not let them stranded in the sea. Earlier, 30 migrants died of hunger on the boat after Malaysian Coast Guards refused their entry in the country. In a statement, the international watchdog said Malaysia's government is risking lives by pushing back overloaded boats of refugees. It said Malaysia's claim to support Rohingya rights mean shockingly little when they push desperate refugees back to sea. The body said COVID-19 pandemic does not create a justification for risking the lives of refugees. It said Kuala Lumpur should adopt systems to ensure that its fundamental human rights obligations alongside public health measures. In another news, a U.S. court has put on hold Amazon's lawsuit challenging the Pentagon's decision to award a $10 billion contract to Microsoft. Accepting Pentagon's request, the judge ordered the case to remain on hold until 17th August. The Pentagon urged the court to allow more time for an internal review to reconsider some aspects of the decision. Amazon was originally considered to be the favorite to win Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure contract known as the JEDI. The cloud computing contract is intended to give the military better access to data and technology from remote locations. The November lawsuit accused Pentagons of buckling under political pressure and making an erroneous decision. In Colombia, startup Rappi is piloting deliveries by robots as a safe way of getting food to the people staying at home due to the coronavirus pandemic. Let's find out more about this in this report.
The boxy robots carry deliveries of up to 35 square centimeters in the capital, Medellin. In a statement, Rappi said the robots complete the last mile of the deliveries and are disinfected before and after each use. The robots are jointly operated by Rappi and US-based KiwiBot. The residents say the robots are fulfilling the demand that the pandemic requires.
Personally, it seems very futuristic to me. But the technology advances in such an exaggerated way that it allows this type of situation to occur.
Rappi has completed close to 120 deliveries each day, with 15 robots in the pilot area.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a $19 billion relief program to help farmers cope with the impact of COVID-19. Trump's initiative includes $16 billion in direct payments to producers of meat, dairy, vegetables, and other products. The payments are capped at $250,000 per individual farmer or entity.
Today, I'm also announcing that Secretary Perdue, who happens to be right next to me, handsome man, and the Department of Agriculture will be implementing a $19 billion relief program for our great farmers and ranchers as they cope with the fallout of the global pandemic. The program will include direct payments to farmers as well as mass purchases of dairy, meat, and agricultural produce to get that food to the people in need.
Meanwhile, Canada has also announced an almost $2 billion package to help the hard-hit oil and gas industry. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the measure will help companies avoid bankruptcy and save 10,000 jobs. More in our business section, we have Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro, who has called for reopening the country's borders with Uruguay and Paraguay to restart the economy. Bolsonaro said he was willing to reopen the trade, while agreeing he will be blamed if the outbreak got worse. Meanwhile, Chile's President Sebastián Piñera promised a gradual reopening of economy amid an expected contraction by 2%. Government data showed measures to combat the pandemic will deepen Chile's fiscal deficit to 8%, the largest gap since 1990. Over in Mexico, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador vowed to inject about $2.5 billion into the economy. Obrador is under increasing pressure as his government tries to fight the pandemic impact and protect businesses and jobs. African leaders, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have appealed for rapid global action to help countries respond to the coronavirus pandemic. The outbreak is projected to cause the continent's economy to shrink by 1.25% in 2020, which is the worst on record. Addressing an online conference, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said Africa lacked the resources and healthcare capacity to address the crisis. She said the continent needs at least $114 billion to cover urgent fiscal needs. Officials said even after pledges of support from bilateral, multilateral and private creditors, Africa faces a gap of around $44 billion. The World Health Organization has also warned that the rapid development of COVID-19 in Africa over the past week is worrisome. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.